Big mistake. She publicly slapped the billionaire's black wife. A moment later, she was begging for. One mistake can change your whole life, especially when it happens in public. When a jealous woman slapped Vanessa Harrington, the black wife of a billionaire, the entire gala froze in silence. What happened next shocked everyone, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Speech balloon. Before we dive in, hit subscribe and drop a comment. What would you do if someone disrespected you in front of the world? The Harrington Foundation's annual charity gala was the kind of event that lit up New York society like a constellation. Flashbulbs popped outside the towering glass hotel, catching glimpses of politicians, movie stars, and Fortune 500 giants as they strutted the red carpet in tuxedos and gowns. But none drew more attention than Richard Harrington, one of America's most powerful billionaires, and his wife, Vanessa Harrington. Vanessa was breathtaking in a deep emerald gown that hugged her curves, her rich brown skin glowing beneath the chandeliers. She had an effortless grace, the kind of presence that could silence a room before she even spoke. Born and raised in Atlanta, she hadn't grown up with money. She was the daughter of a schoolteacher and a jazz musician, the kind of woman who had worked her way through college waiting tables before earning a scholarship to study law. That grit clung to her still, even as she stood arm in arm with one of the wealthiest men in America. Richard adored her openly. His silver hair was slicked back, his custom-tailored tucks sharp, but his eyes softened whenever they landed on Vanessa. He wasn't just a billionaire tonight, he was a man proud of the woman who stood beside him. Together, they represented something rare in that room: power with heart, wealth with humility. The gala had barely begun when whispers started. Some admired Vanessa with genuine respect, others with jealousy thinly disguised as curiosity. In New York high society, her presence was still a novelty, a black woman from humble roots standing at the pinnacle of elite wealth. Most guests clapped politely when Richard introduced her to foreign investors, but not everyone could hide the bitterness in their eyes. One woman in particular couldn't. Claudia Wexler, the daughter of an oil tycoon, had once been rumored to be Richard's flame years before Vanessa came into the picture. Blonde, statuesque, and used to being the center of attention, Claudia wasn't accustomed to losing in any arena, business, social, or romantic. Seeing Vanessa on Richard's arm that night made her blood boil in ways she didn't expect. The tension came to a head during the silent auction. Richard and Vanessa were standing by a display of rare art pieces, surrounded by reporters and photographers. Vanessa leaned in to whisper something in Richard's ear, and he laughed, a soft, warm laugh that made their intimacy undeniable. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing the moment. That was when Claudia stormed forward, her high heels clacking like gunshots across the marble floor. "Vanessa," she sneered, loud enough for half the room to hear. "It must be nice playing dress-up. But don't forget, you'll never belong here. You're nothing but a—" Before she could finish the venom on her tongue, Claudia's hand snapped across Vanessa's cheek. The sound of the slap echoed like a gunshot. Glasses froze midair. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the orchestra faltered for a beat. Vanessa didn't stumble. She didn't flinch. She simply stood there, eyes locked on Claudia, her cheek stinging but her dignity untouched. The tattoo of silence in that grand hall was deafening. For a moment, it seemed as though the world had tilted. Claudia's chest heaved, waiting for a reaction. Richard's fists curled at his sides, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. The cameras kept flashing, capturing the slap, capturing Vanessa's poise, capturing history in the making. And then, Claudia's face changed. The arrogance melted. Her lips trembled. She looked around and saw not support, but disgust. Guests were whispering now, about her, not Vanessa. Her slap hadn't diminished Vanessa. It had diminished her. "Vanessa, Richard, Claudia stammered, her voice breaking as the weight of her mistake finally dawned on her. "Please, I didn't mean." But the damage was done. The power had shifted. And in that moment Claudia, who had once ruled every room she entered, was suddenly the one begging. Speech balloon reflection question for viewers. If you were in Vanessa's shoes, would you have stayed silent with dignity, or struck back in the heat of the moment? Comment your answer below. The silence in the gala hall stretched so long it was almost unbearable. The chandeliers glittered overhead, the string quartet's instruments lay frozen in their hands, and every pair of eyes was locked on the scene before them. Vanessa, cheeks still flushed from the sting, straightened her spine. She didn't so much as raise a hand to touch her face, though the skin burned hot. The restraint was deliberate, powerful. She wasn't going to give Claudia, or anyone else, the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. Richard's chest rose and fell like a storm barely contained. His hand twitched, not out of violence but out of helpless fury, torn between protecting his wife and not lowering himself to Claudia's level. His voice came out like thunder, sharp enough to break the room's silence. "Claudia, what have you done?" The blonde socialite's bravado dissolved under the weight of his tone. She faltered, eyes darting between the crowd, searching for allies and finding none. Some guests turned their backs in quiet condemnation. Others whispered furiously, shaking their heads. A few reporters held their cameras higher, sensing scandal worth millions in headlines. Claudia tried to recover, her words tumbling out in desperation. I was provoked. She thinks she belongs here, but she doesn't, she never will." Her voice cracked, the arrogance melting into panic. Vanessa finally spoke. Her tone wasn't raised, but it cut sharper than Claudia's slap ever could. "Belonging isn't something people like you give, Claudia. It's something earned." The words landed heavy, rippling through the crowd. A hush fell deeper still, and for the first time in years, Claudia Wexler, the untouchable, looked small. Richard stepped closer, his arm instinctively wrapping around Vanessa, grounding her, shielding her. "You will leave this gala immediately," he ordered Claudia, his voice low but carrying. "And you will never disrespect my wife again." Claudia gasped, as though the ground had opened beneath her. The cameras clicked. Some caught her tears forming, others caught her shaking head. "Richard, please, I was upset, I wasn't thinking, don't do this to me." But the tide had already turned. What she thought would humiliate Vanessa had instead unmasked her own bitterness. Guests began clapping softly, first one table, then another. It wasn't applause for the slap, it was for Vanessa, who stood with quiet dignity in the face of public humiliation. Soon the hall echoed with it, a wave of approval that made Claudia's cheeks burn crimson. Unable to endure it, Claudia turned and fled the room, her heels clattering on marble like the last notes of a broken song. Vanessa exhaled slowly, though inside her chest a storm churned. She hadn't chosen this moment, but it had chosen her. And now, all of society had witnessed both her strength and her vulnerability. The rest of the night unfolded under a strange current. Some guests approached Vanessa with sympathy, others with admiration, and still others with the sharp curiosity of vultures circling a wounded animal. Richard never left her side, holding her hand through every whispered conversation, his touch steadying her when her heart threatened to race out of control. But Vanessa's mind replayed the slap again and again, not for the pain, but for what it symbolized. She knew this wasn't just about Claudia's jealousy. It was about something larger, the unspoken resentment that some in Richard's circle still held against her, a black woman who had broken into their world not by begging for acceptance but by commanding respect. And now, because Claudia had acted on that resentment, the world was watching. That night, as they left the gala, reporters swarmed the couple. Flashes blinded them as microphones pushed forward. "Vanessa, how do you feel after being assaulted in public?" "Richard, will you be pressing charges? Was this racially motivated?" "Claudia Wexler says she wants to apologize. Will you accept?" Richard tried to shield her from the chaos, but Vanessa raised her chin. She paused, facing the cameras directly. "I feel the same way I felt before I walked into that room," she said firmly. "Loved, respected, and unashamed of who I am." The reporters went wild. Her words became the headline before the sun even rose. By morning, every news outlet was replaying the slap, but more importantly, they were quoting Vanessa's calm, dignified response. Public opinion began to shift rapidly. What Claudia meant as destruction had become Vanessa's elevation. But with visibility came danger. Not everyone celebrated her resilience. Some whispered darker things, resentful that she hadn't been broken. And Vanessa knew, this was only the beginning of a much bigger battle. If millions of people suddenly saw you at your most vulnerable moment, would you embrace the spotlight or hide from it? Comment your thoughts below. The morning after the gala felt surreal. Vanessa sat at the marble kitchen island of their penthouse, a cup of coffee cooling between her hands. The view of Manhattan glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows, but her mind wasn't on the skyline. It was on the flood of notifications lighting up her phone. Dozens of news clips. Hundreds of blog posts. Thousands of social media comments. Queen energy. Vanessa handled that with more class than all of them combined. I can't believe Claudia slapped her. Arrest her. Finally, someone standing up to old money arrogance. But there were darker ones too. She doesn't belong in his world. Never will. Gold digger hiding behind her skin color. This is why society is falling apart, letting outsiders in. Vanessa scrolled for too long, her chest tightening until Richard appeared behind her, resting his hands gently on her shoulders. Don't read those, he said softly, as though he could sense the poison in the words. She looked up at him, her eyes tired but steady. I can't ignore them either, Richard. This is the world we live in. And now, I'm no longer invisible to them. He pulled up a stool, sitting beside her. You've always been visible to me. And last night proved to the world what I already knew, that you are stronger than all their hate put together. She wanted to believe him fully. Part of her did. But another part whispered the truth she couldn't shake, that being visible wasn't always safety. Sometimes it was danger. Later that week, the tension escalated. Richard's family summoned him to a private gathering at the Harrington estate in Connecticut. Vanessa was invited too, though the word invited felt like a trap. She knew Richard's mother, Margaret Harrington, disapproved of her, even if she never said it openly. The slap had given Margaret an opportunity to draw battle lines. When they arrived, Vanessa's nerves prickled the moment she stepped onto the grand estate's gravel driveway. The Harrington mansion loomed with old money arrogance. Columns, sprawling lawns, staff lined up like chess pieces. Inside, the family was waiting. Richard's brothers, cold and stiff. His sister, polite but distant. And at the center, Margaret, elegant in pearls and silk, her smile sharp as glass. Vanessa, Margaret said, rising to kiss the air near her cheek. You've certainly made headlines this week. Vanessa forced a smile. Not exactly the way I wanted, but yes, it seems so. Margaret's eyes gleamed, though her lips never curved. Sometimes, dear, headlines come at a price. Dignity, reputation, peace. I worry you may not be prepared for the storms our family endures. Richard cut in, his jaw tight. Mother, Vanessa has already weathered more than most people here will ever understand. If anyone is prepared, it's her. But Margaret wasn't done. And what of Claudia Wexler? She comes from a family that has been intertwined with ours for generations. Now she's humiliated on every newsstand in the country. Do you think her family will forgive this scandal? Vanessa's breath caught. So that was it. This wasn't just about Claudia. It was about the power web of old money, and Vanessa had just been thrown into the middle of it. Margaret, Vanessa said, her tone steady though her pulse raced. Claudia made her choice. Actions have consequences, even for people with last names that open doors. If they blame me for her mistake, then they're admitting the truth, that they don't see us as equal. And that's not my burden to carry. The silence that followed was suffocating. One of Richard's brothers shifted uncomfortably. His sister glanced away. But Richard looked at his wife with pride swelling in his chest. Margaret's smile never faltered, but her eyes sharpened. You are bold, Vanessa. Boldness is admirable. But it can also be dangerous. The weeks that followed were filled with whispers, rumors, and subtle hostilities. Vanessa received anonymous letters, some praising her, others laced with venom. Paparazzi hounded her, waiting for her to slip, to break. Richard's business associates asked careful, pointed questions about whether the incident was affecting company deals. And then, the biggest blow came. One evening, Richard walked into the penthouse with a grim look. He handed Vanessa a folded newspaper. On the front page was a photo of her at the gala, standing dignified after the slap. But the headline screamed. The article dredged up her past, her working-class roots, her early struggles, even a half-truth about a scholarship she once received. They painted her as an opportunist, someone who had clawed her way into Richard's world not with love, but with calculation. Vanessa's hands trembled as she set the paper down. So that's what this is about. They want to reduce me to a stereotype. To erase me as a woman, a wife, and make me just a scandal. Richard took her hands in his voice fierce. Listen to me. They can write all the headlines they want. But they don't know you. They don't know your heart. And I'll burn every bridge in this city before I let them take you from me." Tears welled in Vanessa's eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't afford to cry, not now. "Then we fight. Not by their rules. By ours." For the first time, Richard saw in his wife not just grace, but fire. A fire that no slap, no headline, no old money disapproval could extinguish. And in that moment he knew, the storm was only beginning, but together, they could weather it. If society turned against you because of who you married or where you came from, would you fight to prove yourself, or walk away to protect your peace? The Harrington penthouse was unusually quiet the night the invitation arrived. A thick cream envelope, hand-delivered by a messenger, embossed with gold lettering. Vanessa turned it over in her hands, her heart thudding. It was from the Wexlers. "An evening of reconciliation and grace," the card read, inviting the Harringtons to a private dinner at the Wexler estate. Vanessa laughed bitterly. "Reconciliation? They want to parade me in front of their friends, humiliate me again, and call it grace." Richard tore the card in half. "We don't have to go." But Vanessa put her hand over his. Her voice was steady, though fire burned in her eyes. "Yes, we do. Because if I run, they win. And if I show up, I set the terms." The Wexler estate was a cathedral of arrogance, grand chandeliers, portraits of ancestors glaring from the walls, silver polished so bright it reflected the faces of those who passed. Guests whispered as Vanessa entered on Richard's arm, her dark evening gown flowing like midnight silk. Claudia was already there, radiant in red, her smile sharp as a dagger. She greeted them with mock sweetness. "Vanessa. Richard. How brave of you to come. I was worried you'd be embarrassed." Vanessa's lips curved in a calm smile. "Embarrassment requires guilt, Claudia. I'm afraid that's yours to carry." The room went tense. A murmur ran through the crowd. Claudia's eyes flashed, but she gestured to the table. "Shall we dine?" Dinner was a theater of daggers. Every question was laced with venom. "So Vanessa," one guest drawled, "what's it like going from waiting tables to hosting galas?" Another chimed in, "Do you ever feel out of place among us?" Margaret Harrington sat stone-faced, saying little, but her silence spoke volumes. Vanessa felt the weight of every stare, every whispered judgment. But she lifted her glass, her voice calm, her words deliberate. "Out of place? Sometimes. But then I remember that value isn't written in a family name or stitched into a bank account. It's in how we treat people. How we rise after being struck down. And in that sense, I feel perfectly at home." The table fell silent. Even Richard looked at her with awe. But Claudia wasn't done. She leaned forward, her voice cutting through the quiet. "Tell me, Vanessa, when you look in the mirror, do you really see yourself as one of us? Or do you see what everyone else does, that you'll always be an outsider?" The words hit like a slap. The room gasped. Vanessa set her fork down, meeting Claudia's gaze. For a moment, she let the silence hang heavy, unbearable. Then she spoke, her voice low but resonant. "When I look in the mirror, Claudia, I see a woman who earned her place with dignity, not inheritance. I see a wife who loves her husband without condition. And I see a black woman who refuses to shrink to make people like you comfortable. If that makes me an outsider, then I wear it with pride." The silence broke, not with whispers, but with applause. A few guests, hesitant at first, clapped. Then more joined in. Even those who once doubted her found themselves caught in the force of her truth. Claudia's face twisted in fury, but before she could lash out, Margaret finally spoke. "That's enough." All eyes turned to her. Margaret rose slowly, her pearls gleaming under the chandelier. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the room. "Vanessa, I will admit. I doubted you. Not because of your skin, though I know that is what many whisper. I doubted because I feared you would not withstand the cruelty of this world. I was wrong." Gasps echoed. Claudia stiffened, stunned. Margaret's eyes locked on Vanessa's. "Tonight, you showed more grace and strength than anyone here. Including me. If my son loves you, and you can stand firm in this storm, then you belong, not just at this table but at his side. And I will stand beside you." Richard's hand found Vanessa's under the table, squeezing hard. For the first time that evening, tears pricked Vanessa's eyes. Not from pain, but from unexpected recognition. But Claudia wasn't finished. Rage boiled in her voice. You're all blind. She humiliated me. She doesn't deserve this family, this wealth, this life. And then, in a final act of desperation, Claudia stood and slapped her palm against the table. If she stays, I'll ruin you all. Every deal, every alliance, gone. The room froze. Vanessa stood slowly, her presence commanding. You already ruined yourself, Claudia. The night you struck me, the world saw who you are. And tonight, they see who I am. You can cling to hate, but it will devour you. I choose love, dignity, and truth. That is why I win. The applause returned, louder now, undeniable. Claudia's face flushed crimson, and with a strangled cry, she stormed out, her heels echoing like thunder. The dinner ended not in scandal, but in triumph. Guests approached Vanessa, some with apologies, others with genuine respect. Richard held her close, whispering, You were magnificent. You've changed everything. As they left the Wexler estate, Vanessa looked up at the night sky. For the first time in weeks, her chest felt lighter. She had been tested, attacked, humiliated, but she had stood tall. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was more than a victory for herself. It was a crack in the walls of an ancient system. A sign that dignity, courage, and truth could challenge power and win. If you were in Vanessa's place at that dinner table, surrounded by enemies waiting for you to break, what would you have done? Fought back with fire, or answered with calm dignity? The Wexler dining room shimmered with opulence, gold-framed oil paintings, long velvet drapes, a mahogany table that stretched like a battlefield. Every seat at the table was filled with power, old families, business titans, and political patrons. And every gaze was sharpened, waiting for blood. Vanessa walked into the lion's den with Richard beside her. Her dark gown glided across the marble floor, her chin lifted, her step steady. She looked like she had been carved from resilience itself. Claudia rose immediately from her seat, her lips curved in a false smile. Vanessa, how wonderful you accepted our invitation. It shows such courage. The undertone was venomous. Guests chuckled nervously. Vanessa met her eyes, unblinking. Courage is showing up when people expect you to run. That's why I'm here. The first strike had landed, quiet but devastating. Claudia's smile faltered. The servants poured wine, laid out dishes of roasted duck, truffle risotto, and crystal bowls of caviar. But no one tasted the food. Every word spoken at the table was a blade wrapped in silk. So Vanessa, a banker's wife, asked with a sly tilt of her head, Do you miss waiting tables? Must feel like such a leap. Laughter rippled. Vanessa placed her napkin gently on her lap, her posture unshaken. No leap at all. Serving others teaches you everything you need to know about leadership, patience, humility, and grace under pressure. Qualities some people here might find useful. The room went still. The banker's wife blushed, staring at her plate. Another man tried. But surely it must feel strange, being in a place where most of us were born into privilege. Vanessa sipped her wine calmly before replying. Strange? Sometimes. But I've learned something powerful. When you've had to fight for every step, every seat you take at a table feels more earned. I don't just sit here because of Richard. I sit here because I refuse to be silent. The table went quiet again. Richard's eyes burned with pride. Claudia could no longer contain her fury. Her fork clattered against her plate as she leaned forward. Do you even hear yourself? You think because you can string a few noble words together that you belong here? You're nothing but a charity case. Richard dressed up to look respectable. The gasp around the table was audible. Vanessa's heart thudded, but her voice was steady. Respectable? Claudia, respect is not an outfit. It's not inherited or bought. It's lived. And the more you try to strip it from me, the more it reveals who you are, not who I am. Claudia's face twisted. She slammed her hand on the table, wine glasses trembling. This is our world, Vanessa. And no matter how much money Richard throws at you, you will never ever be one of us. The air was electric. The orchestra in the adjacent room faltered, strings screeching to a stop. Vanessa rose slowly, pushing back her chair. Her voice carried like iron wrapped in velvet. You're right, Claudia. I will never be like you. I will never build my worth on hate. I will never measure myself by ancestry or arrogance. And I will never beg for acceptance from people too blinded by fear to see a woman's true value. The guests shifted, the weight of her words pressing on them. And let me tell you something you'll never understand. I don't need your world. Because I carry my own wherever I go. A world where love is stronger than hate, where dignity matters more than bloodlines. That world is mine, and it cannot be taken from me. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling into thunder. People rose to their feet. Some clapped reluctantly, others passionately. For the first time, Vanessa's voice had shattered centuries of unspoken rules at that table. Margaret Harrington stood at last. The matriarch's presence silenced the applause instantly. All eyes turned to her, the one whose opinion had remained a mystery. "Vanessa," she said softly, "I have been guilty. Not of Claudia's hatred, but of silence. I doubted you, not because of your color, though I knew the whispers, but because I feared this world would devour you. I see now that I was wrong." The crowd gasped. Margaret stepped closer, her pearls catching the light. "You have more strength, more grace, more right to stand at this table than anyone who questions you. If my son loves you, then I love you. If this family is to survive, it is with you in it. Not outside." Tears pricked Vanessa's eyes. Richard gripped her hand, unable to hide the emotion shining in his gaze. Claudia's face twisted in horror. "You can't be serious. You'd betray your own bloodline for her." Margaret turned to her coolly. "Claudia, bloodlines mean nothing without honor. And tonight, you've shown you have none." The slap of words was louder than Claudia's physical strike weeks before. Drop of blood, Claudia snapped. Her voice rose shrill, echoing off the marble walls. "No. You're all fools. She humiliated me, destroyed me. If you keep her, I'll take everything from you. I'll ruin your alliances, your businesses. You'll regret this." Her threat rang through the room like thunder. Vanessa stepped forward, her face calm, her eyes unyielding. "You've already ruined yourself, Claudia. The world saw it the moment you raised your hand against me. Tonight, they see the truth again. You can cling to hatred, but it will consume you. I choose love, dignity, and truth. That is why I win." For a long moment, Claudia stared at her, trembling, her chest heaving. Then, with a strangled cry, she grabbed her clutch and stormed out. The slam of the estate's door echoed like the fall of an empire. The dinner ended not with humiliation, but with transformation. Guests surrounded Vanessa, some with apologies, others with admiration. Deals were whispered, alliances forged. What Claudia meant for destruction had become Vanessa's crowning moment. Margaret kissed her cheek, whispering, "Welcome home." Richard pulled her into his arms, his voice breaking. "You didn't just stand tall tonight, you changed everything. You changed me." Vanessa closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his embrace, the echo of applause, the weight of history shifting. For the first time in her life, she felt not like a survivor, but a victor. If you were Vanessa, facing a room of enemies waiting to tear you down, would you have chosen calm dignity like her, or would you have fought fire with fire? The morning sun spilled gently into the Harrington estate, painting the marble floors gold. For the first time in weeks, Vanessa woke without that crushing weight in her chest. She lay still, staring at the high ceiling, listening to Richard's soft, steady breathing beside her. His arm draped across her waist as if to remind her that no matter what the world threw at them, he wasn't letting go. But outside, the world was far from quiet. Headlines had exploded overnight. Socialite Claudia Wellington's empire crumbles after diner outburst. Another, Vanessa Harrington's tattoo, a story of resilience that shook the elite. And another still, from humiliation to honor, the black wife who stood tall against disrespect. The whispers of the city, once venomous, were now reshaped into reluctant admiration. The same people who had once sneered at Vanessa for not belonging in billionaire circles were now fascinated by her story, her grace, and her strength. Richard stirred and opened his eyes. "You're awake early," he murmured. "I couldn't sleep," Vanessa admitted. "It feels different today. Like the world is watching me, but not in the same way." "They are," Richard said firmly. He sat up and took her hands in his. "But they're watching a queen now. Not someone to be mocked, someone to be honored. 2 days later, Vanessa made a choice that startled everyone. She asked to return to the diner where it had all begun. Richard frowned when she brought it up. Vanessa, you don't need to step foot in that place again. We can have every fine restaurant in the city cater to us. Why go back there? Because, she said, her voice calm but steady, I need to reclaim it. That place holds my humiliation. But it can also hold my victory. Margaret nodded approvingly. Sometimes, healing means walking back into the fire and proving you no longer burn. And so, with Richard by her side and Margaret walking a little slower but prouder than ever, Vanessa returned. When she opened the diner door, the room froze just like the first time, but the silence was different. It wasn't filled with scorn or mockery. It was filled with awe. Conversations faltered, cups hovered midair, and the waitress at the counter nearly dropped her pen. There she stood, dressed not in diamonds or couture, but in a simple, elegant navy dress. Her hair was pulled back, her tattoo visible and unhidden. The same cook who had once stared now removed his cap respectfully. A woman at one of the booths whispered, "That's her. That's the one who stood up to Claudia." Vanessa smiled softly. "Good morning." Her voice carried warmth, not pride. And the silence broke, not with laughter this time, but with gentle applause. It started with one man in the corner, then spread, until the whole diner clapped. Vanessa felt her eyes sting with tears. This was no longer the place of her shame. It was the place of her redemption. News of Claudia's unraveling spread fast. Sponsors pulled out from her charity events. Brands distanced themselves. Her circle of friends shrank to nothing. The woman who once held the city hostage with her influence now sat in her penthouse, alone, her phone buzzing with rejections. Richard, though tempted, refused to gloat. Let her fall by her own weight, he told Vanessa. Her pride was always her undoing. Vanessa nodded. She had no need for vengeance. Life had delivered justice on its own. Margaret, who had once been skeptical of Vanessa, now embraced her like a daughter. One afternoon, as they sat in the Harrington garden, Margaret reached over and took Vanessa's hand. "You remind me of myself when I was your age," she said softly. "Only braver. I married into wealth too, and I thought I'd drown in it. But I never had the courage to stand as tall as you." Vanessa squeezed her hand. "You've stood tall in your own way. Look at Richard. Look at the values you gave him. Without you, he wouldn't be who he is." Margaret's eyes glistened. For the first time, Vanessa felt like she truly belonged, not as an outsider, but as family. That night, Richard took Vanessa out to the balcony overlooking the city. The skyline glowed like scattered diamonds, but his gaze was fixed only on her. "You've changed me," he said, voice low and thick with emotion. "Before you, I thought strength meant power, money, control. But you've shown me it's something else entirely. It's grace under fire. It's knowing who you are when the world tries to strip it away." Vanessa smiled, tears brimming. "And you've shown me that love isn't about protection. It's about partnership." He kissed her gently, but this time there was no desperation, no fear of loss. Only certainty. Only a future. A week later, Vanessa walked alone down a familiar street. She passed the corner where she had once waited tables, wearing second-hand shoes and carrying dreams too heavy for her shoulders. She paused, looking at the reflection of herself in a shop window. But she didn't see the girl who had been humiliated in a diner. She saw the woman who had stood back up, who had turned her pain into power. Her tattoo, once a symbol of loss and shame, was now her crown. It told the story of survival, of love, of dignity. As she walked on, people recognized her. Some smiled, some nodded respectfully. Not as Richard Harrington's wife, but as Vanessa, the woman who had taught them all a lesson about worth. The city had seen scandals come and go, but Vanessa's story lingered because it wasn't just about a slap or a scandal. It was about what happens when a woman refuses to let the world define her. Vanessa had faced humiliation, betrayal, and cruelty. Yet she had walked through fire, and instead of burning, she had illuminated the path for others. And as she looked at Richard waiting for her at the end of the street, hand extended, love steady in his eyes, Vanessa knew her story was no longer about survival. It was about triumph. Thank you for watching. Do not forget to subscribe for more interesting stories.